Well, I was tired of you complaining about my dull backgrounds. I had to do something.
I like the picture of Jeff driving the motorcycle. That was quite a few years ago, I guess, eh, Jeff?
Yeah.
Is the chief on?
Chief's in. He's in his office.
Okay.
He's on. Chief is on.
Okay. So if we open on time and I throw it to him, he's going to be there. Oh, there he is.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good.
I was just trying to get the last few seconds of U.S. elections in. Sorry. Thought maybe they declared a winner.
Oh, yeah, they declared one earlier this morning.
Well, someone declared himself, I
Yeah.
think.
I said, I'm sort of disappointed in the Americans. I mean, last time I could understand they weren't really sure what exactly they were going to get by voting for Trump. Now it's pretty damn clear, and they half the country voted for him.
Tells you something.
It does, and I don't like what it's telling us. Okay.
Okay. Is everyone good if we start now? I'd like to call a special meeting to order for November 4th, 2020. I'd like to start this meeting by recognizing that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We also recognize and respect the cultural diversity that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people bring to the City of Ottawa. We are currently broadcasting on Zoom and live streaming on YouTube. Given this meeting is being held electronically, I want to caution that there is a possibility of technical difficulties. Should we receive any disruptions, I'd like to ask that everyone remain patient as we work to fix the issue and resume the meeting as soon as possible. In terms of meeting decorum, I'd like to remind everyone to mute their notifications and alerts to avoid any disruptions in the meeting. If you are joining without video, please say your name before speaking. If you're joining the meeting from a location with background noise, please keep yourself muted until it's time for you to speak. I'd also like to remind all board members that the purpose of today's meeting is to table the budget only. Any questions posed to staff should be high-level process-related questions. Questions relating to the content should be kept for our November 9th FAC meeting and/or our board meeting on November 23rd. So we'll start with the confirmation agenda that the Ottawa Police Services Board confirmed the agenda of the November 4th, 2020 meeting. And Councillor Meehan, will you move that?
I so move, Chair.
You carried?
Carried.
Thank you. There is only one item of business on this morning's agenda. It's the 2021 draft operating and capital budgets. And so Chief Slowly, I will turn things over to you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair and Board. I have to say I had a little extra large coffee this morning coming out of some late night viewing of events south of our border. But nonetheless, I look forward to a very productive set of budget deliberations based on the information that we're presenting to you and the board. and later on in the process that will involve the city. We've worked very hard on this. I want to give as much credit as possible to the full command team, particularly CAO Jeff Letourneau, his CFO Cyril Rogers, and their financial team. But I assure you, this is based on input from across the board within our membership and within our community. And much of what is in here represents a lot of what we've heard over the last year, and a lot of what we have been hearing from our own members and from our community members, as well as from our board around your vision. In that regards, we've worked hard to present a budget that is in full compliance with the city's and the board's rules. And within the budget envelope as presented to us, there are no new resource requests within this budget. Chair, it aligns with your vision for a multi-year change budget, and it has significant investments in the board's four main priorities: the modernization of this service, the advancement of community policing as a service delivery model for our community, the application of equity, diversity, and inclusion principles and practices across the board, both internally and externally in terms of service delivery, and last but not least, for the health and wellness of our members. This is not a business as usual budget. This is a business as different and better budget. Next slide, please. So just briefly, over the next little while, myself, Jeff Letourneau, and Cyril Rogers will walk you through the following 5 broad areas: the policing context and operational priorities. I will be leading in that area. Points 2 and 3, Jeff Letourneau, the 2021 draft operating budget, the draft operating forecast for 2022 through 2024. And then Cyril will support in with number 4 and number 5, the draft capital budget and timetable. Next slide, please. So, change budget. I think the title sort of speaks for itself. Since I've arrived here as Chief of Police, a lot of listening, a lot of learning, a lot of changing. I say that across the board, not just for me. Chair, it's a new board. It's turned itself over quite a bit since I arrived. Your return as chair, the context of your return into a world gripped with COVID, the impacts locally and globally of the George Floyd effect, Black Lives Matter, our own local challenges in regards to the outcome of the Monsignor trial, and years, if not decades, of deliberations across civil society and the local city and our own members. What should this organization look like? What should our culture be? How should our approach be to delivering services? What should the nature of our relationship be? What is our role in a broader construct of community safety and well-being? There are some key priorities that we're going to be delivering on. At the last board meeting, we had an extensive discussion led by Deputy Chief Bell around a new approach to mental health responses in the city, one that will have the police still playing an important role, but a much more reduced role, and one that will have us at the table, but not at the head of the table, in designing, implementing, and evaluating that strategy. One that will be led, not least of which by Ottawa Public Health, but a broader set of stakeholders in the health community, the mental health community, as well as in our different demographic and geographic communities. One where that at the end of it, we'll have better training for our Ottawa Police Service members and an integrated response for all community members across the city. Second area, a significant investment in training, particularly as it relates to advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion, and specifically around de-escalation training, anti-Black and Indigenous racism training, and a broader approach to mental health training. It will include some additional efforts around, it's written as Indigenous cultural awareness, but I think it's actually going to be more practical, the application of practices, including a restorative justice approach that we would apply more broadly within our police service, internally as well as in service delivery. An area that I think is very important, and from an operational standpoint, the most important, that we expand our neighborhood policing program, which has been focused in the first year in the downtown urban core out into the suburban and rural areas of this city. It'll look and feel differently because those are different environments. And again, Deputy Bell has been working hard on looking at a model that complies with the principles of neighborhood policing and community policing, but is customized to our suburban and rural parts of the city. I think one that is long overdue. We've spoken about the violence against women priority for this service, but we have not resourced it in the way we've spoken about it. It's time to put our money where our mouth is. We are significantly upstaffing our sexual assault investigators, domestic violence investigators, human trafficking sections, missing persons sections, but with specific coordinators who will be working with the Violence Against Women coalition in the community, as well as a coordinator for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Two important demographics. Two groups of people who have been victimized and have not been able to get the resources necessary to address proactively and reactively their concerns. And again, last but not least, a significant additional investment from last year's around our own members' health and wellness. We know that that's important to them. It allows them to be supported in their family environment. It allows them to come to work and show up in their best selves. It allows them to provide their best service delivery to the million souls in the nation's capital. 4 new full-time equivalents directly involved in members' health and wellness, and an additional $5 million in total investment within the 2021 budget. Ultimately, we're committed to delivering tangible value in terms of resources that people will feel, they will see, they will experience, and it will result in different outcomes, better outcomes. It is designed to be invested in a collaborative, community-based approach, one that will engage our members, one that will engage our community members, one that will improve partnerships, one that will ultimately improve community and safety well-being in Ottawa. Next slide, please. This is a high-level overview of the types of changes that have been happening in and around society, and obviously therefore impacting on policing and police service delivery here in the nation's capital. I touched on a few of these in the previous slide. Demographic changes. I've been taught by elders in this community that this city of Ottawa has changed significantly over the last 20 years. The demographics that make up the city have significantly changed in the last 10 years, and the city itself is trying to catch up to that. The technology, and we've seen on display in the elections, the good, the bad, and the ugly of things like social media, artificial intelligence, facial recognition. There's a vast array of service providers and tech companies that are providing all sorts of solutions. Some of them are actually part of the problem as opposed to the solution. More importantly, our own understanding of the technology and how it can be applied ethically and legally and effectively is limited. And so while there's a rush to find a tech solution, that silver bullet, we've got to be very careful about that. And societal trends. Again, speaking of technology, people are more and more confused about what the facts are, what the truth is, who they can believe and not believe. And that includes the police of jurisdiction, the board, elected officials. These are major changes in society that have really taken place in the last 10 years. And again, policing and broader society need to catch up. Trends in crime. Just within the COVID period, we've seen an increase in online fraud, online child abuse. We know we have underreporting of abuse within the home environment that used to come out during the schools. The schools have been shuttered for much of the year. Children have not had access to take care, and other care providers. Wives and spouses have not been able to broaden their network. And so we're seeing changes in crime patterns. We've seen changes in the driving and dangerous driving patterns even within this year. And again, all of this requires us to think differently and deliver services differently. The new legislation within Ontario as the first Police Services Act to include community safety and well-being legislation requires a whole different approach to how we conceive the role of policing, how we conceive the role of larger city agencies, not-for-profit sector stakeholders in the design, prioritization, design, implementation, and evaluation of any approach to community safety and well-being. It actually, I think, democratizes policing, meaning it turns it back into the hands of the people and less away from the hands of the police chief and the police professionals. We will always have a critical role to play, but we will have a less of a leading role and more of a facilitating, enabling role. And I think, again, challenging as it is in a new legislative framework with these new legal trends that are impacting us, I think there's a wonderful opportunity for the nation's capital to demonstrate its commitment to community safety and well-being, its investment in it more broadly than simply within the policing construct. Let's not lose track of legal decisions that have a major impact, case law that requires a much quicker turnaround for disclosure, for the completion of cases with the liability that offenders will walk free if we can't deliver disclosure and achieve outcomes, dispositions in cases in a much quicker fashion than we've ever done before. These are, again, legislative and legal trend changes. Scope expansion. We are now wrestling with, in the 2021 budget, a new approach to mental health and addictions. In some cases, that will reduce scope. In other cases, it might increase scope. Community safety and well-being, again, will change the scoping nature of policing and service provision. And of course, the impacts of COVID in year, 13.5 million within the 2020 fiscal. And again, the impacts going into 2021 and potentially beyond, because none of us are sure when we'll come out fully from the impacts of COVID, and all of that has to be aligned within our operations and our resources to support those operations. Community perceptions and expectations. I think perceptions have been significantly altered by global events, particularly events south of the border, but also very much by local events. And the impact of the 4 years leading up to the Monsignor trial, the 4 weeks after, and as I said it publicly, the 4 years after this, there are huge changes in terms of perceptions. We've seen that the world has shrunk, and something that happens in a city far to the south of us can have huge impacts locally and vice versa. And expectations. People want solutions yesterday. They want changes immediately. Their patience for long institutional change, cultural change is at a very, very low level. And so how do we manage against those expectations and perceptions while still delivering services that are trusted and respected within the community? The cost of COVID, the cost of living, the complexity of policing, the changes in broader society that are impacting us locally here, all have served to undermine legitimacy and trust in the institution of policing, in, I think, institutions across the board, not just in policing. Legitimacy and trust has been undermined in terms of our views of leaders, elected or otherwise, our views of our neighbors. It's a much more polarized society, not just between police and community, but between us and everything else, it seems. And so we're going to have to work against that global trend of polarization as it manifests itself here locally, and particularly as it manifests itself between the police service of jurisdiction, the Ottawa Police Service, and the local community. Next slide, please. I know this is a busy slide with lots of graphics on it, but if I can simplify it down, we have focused for the majority of my policing career, 3 decades in 2 different jurisdictions and a bunch of different international deployments. Policing has always been around cops and robbers, good guys catching the bad guys, crime up, crime down. We know that that crime and the social determinants of, that the underpinnings of crime are often the social determinants of health. Things like nutrition and access to food, education and graduation rates, housing, as a major issue that underpins so much of what is wrong or right in society, employment. And we've seen the impacts of the COVID effect on employment, particularly in small and medium-sized businesses across this country and across this city. The cohesion of family and whether or not family units are stable. I talked about earlier on, we're seeing more abuse, sexual abuse, domestic abuse, child abuse, online and offline. Access to resources, access to transportation. Much of this underpins an individual, a family, and neighborhood's ability to be safe, to expect to be safe, and to feel safe, and to actually be safe. And so what is the role of policing? Is it now doubling down and tripling down on managing crime, or are we going to have to expand the scope of our responsibilities, not necessarily the leadership of our responsibilities, but the scope to include things like supporting education attainment outcomes, being at the table and discussing housing, having a role in promoting nutrition as much as we promote crime prevention. And yes, we're always going to be the lead role on the crime management, the pursuit of people who victimize and in some cases terrorize our communities, the pursuit of those who, for their own egos and their own agendas and their own profit, will victimize and sometimes terrorize communities, the support of prosecutions to make sure that there is due process, but ultimately right dispositions that achieve public safety outcomes. Will always be the lead in that area, but how do we support and enable in all those other areas? How do we produce new key performance indicators, new benchmarks, new shared outcomes and shared outputs that lead to shared outcomes that reduce risk, build resilience at the individual, family, and neighborhood level, that prevent crime and prevent other aspects of social disorder in order to create a more safe and well city and society. Next slide, please. And while we talk about change and why we build in a larger multi-year change agenda, we can't forget we're going to be refitting and maybe reorienting this plane, but it's still a plane that has to fly. And it has to fly while delivering core police services. Our frontline members, almost 1,300 of them, working a 24/7, 365 basis in Canada's largest municipality that has an urban core, a suburban and growing large suburban ring, a rural community, a green belt, and last but not least is the nation's capital, and works in a very complicated, legislatively complicated, geopolitically complicated national capital region. That is the job of the police of jurisdiction in Ottawa. The Ottawa Police Service has to do its core mandated policing responsibilities, assisting in prosecutions, crime prevention, law enforcement, assisting victims, delivering public order and emergency response. We need to focus on improving road safety across a municipality larger than any other municipality in Canada. We need to address violent crime, whether it be on the street or inside households, inside multi-story apartment buildings. We need to respond to calls for service across a massive geography. And we need to do that integrated with municipal, provincial, interprovincial, national and international security providers who all operate within the national capital region. It is an incredibly complicated piece of business just to deliver our core policing business, never mind advance a very significant change agenda. Next slide, please. So I'm going to transition over now to CAO Letourneau. Again, very proud of the work that Jeff has done in his full first year as the Chief Administration Officer. He's recruited a strong leadership team, particularly in CFO Cyril Rogers. He's contributed to the building of a strong command team, myself, Steve Bell, Acting Deputy Joan McKenna, and Superintendent Mark Ford, who has been in alternating roles with Joan. They've taken on collectively a huge amount of change in the last year. They've delivered within the budget envelope and within the $13.5 million. I have every confidence that the budget we've built going into 2021 will advance the board's priorities, will work in compliance with the city's rules and the board's rules. It will allow us to deliver core policing to 1 million people in the nation's capital, in the national capital region. It will allow us to support our members, to allow them to have the resources, the training, the health and the wellness, the leadership and support necessary to do one of the most difficult and demanding jobs in an unprecedentedly challenging period in policing. It will allow us to build a big tent and not be polarized. It will allow us to deliver our services in a way that will be appreciated, in a way that will deliver respect and earn respect. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jeff.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate the very warm intro. So I'll start with the 2021 budget directions. Direction was received on October 26th from the Ottawa Police Services Board, and they are as follows. Direct staff to prepare the 2021 draft operating and capital budgets based on a 3% Ottawa Police Services levy increase and an estimated 1.5% increase in taxes resulting from assessment growth generated from new properties. The draft operating and capital budget are aligned with these directions. As the Chief has mentioned previously, the 2021 draft budget has been developed based on the calls for change and new approaches while advancing the board's strategic priorities. The following key investments are included in the draft budget. Neighborhood policing, 20 growth officers to create suburban neighborhood resource teams, expanding on the investments made over the past 2 years. This will bring the total number of officers in the neighborhood resource teams to 89, equating to an $11.5 million investment in 2021. 5 growth officers to increase the number of community police officers, along with the development of a youth strategy, including a review of the school resource officer program. Mental health services. The chief spoke about this in a little more detail. The draft budget includes a $1.5 million investment for the co-development of a mental health response strategy with community partners. In terms of sworn officer recruiting, significant changes and improvements have been made to the sworn recruiting process over the past few years. This has resulted in a 400% increase in the number of applicants and a significant increase in the quality, diversity, competence, and skill set of those applicants. In 2020, of the new recruits hired, 33% are women, 35% are racialized, and 3% are Indigenous. These recruits are highly educated, speak multiple languages, and have employment and volunteer experience in youth services, community housing, mental health services, and victim services. Sworn recruiting in 2021 will continue to build off these improvements. The chief also spoke about violence against women investments, and those include 5 growth officers to increase the number of investigators in our sexual assault and child abuse and partner assault units, including a dedicated violence against women liaison coordinator and a dedicated resource focusing on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Training and development investments will include an increased focus on organizational training in 2021. Including investments in anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism and intercultural competency training, along with additional investments in de-escalation training, including an efficacy review to ensure and review the effectiveness of our training in operations. From an EDI perspective, the focus is to continue to implement the EDI action plan, investments in EDI leadership coaching, along with the development of an intercultural development inventory. A major reorganization was executed on October 26th, impacting 60% of the organization. This reorganization was under development for the last 12 months and will better enable the service to deliver on its strategic priorities and execute the changes and priorities identified in this draft budget. Key highlights include a greater focus and alignment on neighborhood policing and supporting the city's community safety and well-being plan to better address the underlying causes of crime and social disorder, along with an overhaul to the intelligence-led policing model to include the ability to focus as much on reducing social disorder and improving traffic safety as we do on crime management. The budget includes 4 new FTEs in member health and wellness to support the wellness of our members. This brings the annual investment in the annual budget up to $5 million. This also includes the investment in third-party intake and investigations for harassment and discrimination complaints, including sexual violence and harassment, through Ruben Tomlinson. I'll talk about financial accountability and the sound financial management next. Over the years, OPS has implemented sound and prudent financial management practices, which have resulted in significant savings. Since 2012, OPS has generated $20 million in annualized operating budget efficiencies, which represents 6% of the draft 2021 net operating budget. In 2021, as you'll see later when I hand over to CFO Cyril Rogers, the 2021 budget includes $2.7 million of budget efficiencies. OPS management is here to support the board, and part of that support is ensuring the board has accurate information. Over the past number of weeks, there have been reports and discussions in other forums that highlighted the OPS budget as growing faster than the city or certain city departments over the last number of years. This slide highlights a few key facts. First, the OPS annual budgets have adhered to City Council and Police Service Board directions over the years. The OPS operating budget has not been growing faster than the city. as the OPS budget as a total percent of the city budget has decreased from 9.9% in 2016 to 9.5% in 2018 and has remained flat up to and including this year, 2021. It is also important to note that the OPS budget includes capital formation costs to pay for buildings, fleet, and IT infrastructure. This needs to be factored in when comparing OPS to individual city departments. As an example, when the 2021 police tax rate increase is broken down, it represents 2.4% for operating and 0.6% for capital formation. The 2.4% would be a more appropriate comparison to individual city departments. The following slide benchmarks the OPS with its top 12 peers across the country. The slide shows the following three key performance indicators: population per police member, percentage of municipal budget allocated for police services, and crime severity index. At 9.5%, the OPS budget allocation is among the lowest in Canada, especially when compared to other regions containing rural, urban, and suburban geography. The population per police member is also among the lowest in Canada and has been steadily eroding as population growth in Ottawa has been outpacing OPS growth. In 2011, the OPS ratio was 479 and has steadily eroded to 549 in 2018. The crime severity index has also been added to this slide and has grown by 23% over the past 5 years in the Ottawa region. This is consistent with trends that we've seen across the country as well, so Ottawa is not an anomaly. And that's increased from 47 up to 58. This is still below the Canadian average of 79, however, is above our regional peers like Peel, York, and Durham. Overall, these metrics show the OPS is an efficient police service dedicated to serving the city of Ottawa. I'm now quite happy to transition to our new CFO, Cyril Rogers, who will go into more detail on the draft operating and capital budget. So Cyril, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me fine. So the agenda slide, I'm going to go through the an overview of the 2021 operating budget, the 3-year operating forecasts, followed by the 2021 draft capital budget and forecast, and then finally a timetable outlining the 2021 budget process and key dates. Budget proposal. The budget proposal aligns to the board's direction to prepare the 2021 draft operating and capital budget based on a 3% police tax levy and a prorated share of 1.5% assessment growth, which is also in line with the direction recommended by council. These directions result in a $13.2 million increase to the 2021 OPS budget, bringing the total operating budget to $332.5 million. The $13.2 million represents 1.5% or $4.3 million assessment growth and a 3% or $8.9 million police tax levy increase. This increase results in an estimated $19 increase on the average urban household with a property tax assessment value at $415,000, bringing the total 2021 police costs, again, for the average urban household with a property tax assessment value of $415,000 to $644 per year. Next slide. This table highlights the breakdown of the $13.2 million 2021 draft operating budget increase and is categorized in accordance with the City of Ottawa budget reporting requirements. Maintain services. $11.3 million investment to maintain services, which ensures the continued delivery of adequate and effective policing services. 81% of the OPS gross operating budget is dedicated to staffing costs. The compensation element of the budget constitutes the most significant cost each year and reflects $8.8 million attributed to compensation and benefit increases supporting existing OPS members and priorities. $2.1 million is attributed to non-compensation items, including $2.4 million reversal of one-time funding that was from the city that was in our 2020 budget, $1.3 million for inflationary and asset lifecycle contributions, offset with the increase of $1.2 million in red light camera funding revenue. It's also important to note that these investments continue to support key budget priorities supporting member health and wellness, equity, diversity, and inclusion, NRT teams implemented in 2020, and the continued return on investments we are seeing through the new streamlined and recruiting application process implemented in 2020. The growth category represents 3.9 million allocated to the 30 officer growth, supporting our key priorities and strategic directions for OPS. 20 growth officers allocated to create suburban NRTs, further expanding on the investments made over the past 2 years. 5 growth officers to increase the number of community police officers, and 5 growth officers allocated to the sexual assault, child abuse, partner assault unit with a dedicated resource for violence against women and a dedicated resource for missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls. New services. In 2021, 800K is being allocated towards key budget priorities previously outlined by the Chief and the CAO. These include 1.5 million for mental health services, offset with a planned $1 million contribution from our provincial partners, 180,000 for sexual harassment project, and 225K for additional training to be provided to our members for de-escalation and diversity. OPS continues to be seeking ways to operate costs while maintaining core objectives. The 2021 budget includes 2.7 million of efficiencies. 1 million is towards back office integration through efficiencies and further integration options with city services, processes, and technologies. 600K of efficiency is for travel and conferences through continuing to leverage virtual training opportunities and significantly lowering OPS travel and expense requirements. An additional 1.1 million of savings through our background savings, savings in our capital contribution, and several other cost savings identified within corporate support functions. User fees and revenue. The user fee increase aligns to the board's user fee policy and ensures that user fees grow at the same pace as the costs. Next slide. This table highlights a further breakdown of the 2021 gross operating budget. The 3% police tax levy supports both the operating and capital requirements of OPS. As previously mentioned, 81% is allocated to compensation and benefits, which reflects the cost of our members moving through their salary steps, provisions for negotiated pay increases, and officer growth. 9% is allocated towards material, supplies, and services, which include fuel for our fleet, uniforms, and safety products for our members, maintenance for facilities, IT infrastructure, and training and development. 7% of the total budget is allocated towards capital formation. This supports the life cycle and infrastructure related to costs for fleet, IT, facilities, and equipment related costs. The final 3%, or 12.3 million, is attributed to city related support costs such as program facility costs and other related support services where OPS and the city are integrated. Next slide. The forecast 2022-2024 forecast is based on a continued staffing plan of 30 officers per year. This projection is needed to support our growing city and geographic diversity of urban, suburban, and rural needs and rapidly diversifying population. The forecast also includes maintained service costs increases for compensation and benefit increases and additional annual inflationary increases. These increases result in a forecasted police tax levy requirement of 3.6 to 3.1%, which represents a reduction in comparison to prior years where the forecast was in the 4% range. It's also important to note during the annual budget development, forecast assumptions are further defined and evaluated to align to the annual budgetary directions set by the Police Services Board. Next slide. This table highlights the 2021 capital envelope to ensure that our assets such as our fleet, facilities, and information technology are maintained and replaced as required. The 24.1 million budget is allocated based on 3 categories: renewal of assets such as fleet, facility lifecycle, information technology infrastructure, and lifecycle of specialized assets. Growth requirements for the South facility, for the comm center and IT related infrastructure, and strategic initiatives reflecting key investments in our NRT facilities, Swansea expansion of space for quartermaster and vehicle storage, and growth costs for lockers, mobile car workstations, etc., that support our growth in our officer complement. Next slide. The 2021 to 2030 capital budget forecast reflects $258.7 million. This reflects an annual average estimate of $26 million per year and aligns to the 2021 capital budget. This forecast reflects the annual life cycle needs to renew and maintain the current OPS asset base. It includes growth funding for vehicles and future strategic initiatives investments. The majority of the OPS capital requirements are funded from our own sources, which reflects the allocation of 0.6% of the 3% police tax levy allocated to fund OPS capital formation costs. 23% is funded by debt, with the remaining funded from revenue sources. Next slide. The following committee meetings and dates outline the next steps in the 2021 operating and capital budget review, approval, and adoption. The public will have the opportunity to come forward with delegations during the Finance and Audit Committee meeting on November 9th, and again at the OPS board meeting on November 23rd. The final City Council review and adoption will take place on December 9th. At this time, as I conclude my portion of the presentation, I would like to extend a special thanks to a couple of the core members involved in the budget process. Jonathan Sweet, Manager of Financial Planning, and his dedicated team. Sheila Hamilton, Owen Bell, and Valerie McCullum. This is Val's 17th budget and will be her final, unfortunately, her final budget, as much as I tried to convince her to stay for OPS as she moves on to the next stage of her career or retirement. It's also important I extend a special thanks to Heather Fisher for her patience, and I got to parenthesize and capitalize patience. Patience, planning, and support, keeping us all in line and keeping us on track to get us where we are today and have a successful tabling on the 2021 OPS budget. Thank you.
Cyril, thank you. And Chair, if you just permit me just a couple of closing comments here as we transition to the deliberation portion. Again, it took a huge team effort to pull this together. Cyril's identified a number of additional names of key people who were able to help the command to envision and present this today. We'll do our best to make sure that Cyril is here for at least 17 more budgets, and that we capture Belle in some way to not allow her to retire without downloading that amazing brain of hers, as well as the heart and soul that goes into this type of work. I just want to repeat again, we are not asking for any new resources. We're working within a reduced envelope. We've assigned major investments to the board's priorities. We've accomplished a multi-year change budget. We are going to deliver services that our members feel are best positioned to help the community and that our community has been requesting. We're putting our money where our mouth is. We're not just saying something's a priority, we're resourcing it as a priority, as a demonstrated priority. This organization, through the oversight of the board and the effectiveness of the command present and past, has increasingly found ways to stretch the dollar and to stretch the human beings within this organization to deliver increasingly better services against a flattening cost curve of the police budget. We are in line and in compliance with the city and the board. We're adapting to massive changes, and we're providing high quality police services in unprecedented times, one of, if not the most challenging times for policing anywhere in Canada, certainly right here in the nation's capital. Very proud of the budget we've presented, and I know it needs to go through a process of deliberation and debate to get to a decision, but I'm proud of the budget we've presented, the spirit behind it, as well as the details that live within it. And at this point, Chair, happy to turn things over to you for further discussion, deliberation.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief, and thank you to all of the presenters. I just wanted to remind you again that today is the tabling of the budget, and it's not a day for deliberation, but if there are any high-level process questions, we will entertain them now. I don't see any hands up. Okay, I did see Councillor King.
Yes, thank you for the presentation, both to the chief and staff. I do have a process question. I think it's just primarily for the public. I know that I've been receiving just some inquiries on where the budget documents might be available for public consumption. So I was just wondering if staff could reiterate where those resources would be made available for the public.
I can jump in and take that, Chief, if you don't mind. The documents were posted on the ottawapolice.ca website this morning before the meeting, so they can be found there.
Okay, and we will also post it on the Police Services Board website as well. Any other questions? I did notice earlier in the meeting, Councillor Fleury had his hand up. Councillor, did you still want to ask a question on process?
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair. No, I'll be attending on Monday and we'll ask my questions at that time. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, seeing no one else, the board's Finance and Audit Committee will be meeting on Monday, November 9th at 1 p.m. to hear from public delegations on the budget. For those listening who would like to address the committee, please note the deadline to register is this Friday, November 6th at 4 p.m. You can email Krista Ferrero to be added to the speakers list, and her email is on the board's website. Our next regular meeting is Monday, November 23rd, 2020. As the board will be considering the budget at that meeting, we have changed the meeting start time to 2 p.m. So thank you all for attending this morning after I'm sure many of us had a late night watching election results. Motion to reserve to adjourn. Member Smallwood?
I would so move.
Thank you. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you on